Okay, let's dive in. We're studying the book of Genesis, and we've started 3 weeks ago with Abraham, which is part 2 of Genesis when you get to Genesis chapter 12. But as I was trying to lay out what we're doing, I kept coming back to this character named Lot. And I think he just sort of deserves a study all of his own. He's all mixed up in the Abraham story, and he's Abraham's nephew. And so tonight we're going to take 3 chapters really where his story is told. Last week we looked at chapter 13, but we're going to visit it again. But so a lot to remember. I like titles. I hope you caught on to that before you came. Maybe not. Let's start this way. If you just follow in your notes, and I just sort of talk our way through it. In Luke 17:32, Jesus gave a 3-word commandment, and I'm going to ask you, have you been obeying this commandment? Remember Lot's wife. It just sort of feels so random, and it's like, as I was working, I said, I'm just going to start there, because Lord, I don't know that I've really obeyed that commandment. I can tell you what happened to Lot's wife. She turned into a pillar of salt. But I know the word remember means more than just be aware of a historical fact. Remember Lot's wife. My purpose is to call us to obey this commandment. In the Greek, it is in the present imperative, which means keep on remembering Lot's wife. You don't just do it once. It's in a tense that means just do it all the time. Jesus never tells us to remember Isaiah or Daniel or Ruth, but he pleads with us not to forget this nameless woman. We don't even know her name, Mrs. Lot. And I don't know why he didn't say remember Lot. To me, that would have made a little more sense. But so this is our goal tonight, is to obey the command to remember what Jesus told us not to forget. Spiritual amnesia, which is when we forget what we are supposed to remember, is not cute or innocuous. It is very serious. Get your concordance sometime and just look up the word remember. Do a word study on remember or forget. Books like Deuteronomy. Oh my goodness, you can't understand Deuteronomy unless you understand the call remember. Remember, don't forget, don't forget. The things we forget typically point to the things that are destroying us and creating dysfunction. And I think this is especially true with Lot's wife. If we forget the story of Lot and Mrs. Lot, it's indicative that we're not seeing something that's eating like a cancer in our families, in our churches, in our souls, in our nation. Because you forget you don't know what you don't know. And that's why you have to be told to remember. The Bible often calls us to remember. That's just remember the Sabbath, and that's convicting. Remember the way the Lord your God led you. Remember where you've fallen. Every time we take communion, it's do this and remember. Don't forget. Don't forget. So, okay. To remember involves more than cognitive recall. If your wife tells you to remember her birthday, she's not just saying, can you repeat for me the date? She's usually saying, did you get me something? Because if you didn't get me something, you forgot my birthday, even if you can repeat what the date is. I mean, we do this in English. It really works. That's how it's used biblically. To remember means to act or to do something. Literally, it means, and think about the word remember. Think about that word member. To remember means to put the members of a past event together again, to remember them, to reassemble them, remember them. That's so interesting. To forget something then means to dismember. So if you've forgotten Lot's wife, tonight we're going to reassemble and the story. So let's remember the story of Lot and his wife. Lot, this is a background. Lot was Abraham's nephew. And I'm not going to look up these verses. We may have read them. When Lot's father, Haran, who was Abraham's brother, died, Abraham adopted him. And nothing legal about it, but basically they said, you don't have a dad, and I don't have a son. And you're my nephew. This just sort of, this can work. This seemed like a perfect match since Abraham had no son and Lot had no father. Thus, Lot was Abraham's potential heir. And that word, when you're talking about Abraham, is a very important word because everything comes through the heir of Abraham. Messiah complete. I mean, Lot was in a pretty amazing sort of position. The defining quality of Lot's early life is captured in the phrase, Lot went with him. In fact, if you want to look, just want you to see those verses. 12:4, you got your Bibles open? I know you. But just 12:4, so Lot went as the Lord told him, and Lot went with him. Then 13:1, so Abraham went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him. And 13 verse 5, and Lot, who went with Abraham, had flocks. So this is sort of Lot's defining characteristic. He just sort of hangs out with Uncle Abe. He goes where Abraham goes. And this may be the key statement in the whole thing, at least for me, that last sentence. Abraham walked with God. We're going to see that in about 2 weeks, where literally Abraham walks with God, like Enoch did, like Noah did. That word walk is a very important word in Genesis. But Lot walked with Abraham. That's good to walk with somebody who walks with God, but we're going to see that's not good enough when you're faced with a city like Sodom particularly. You can't live on second-hand faith. You can get started on it, and if you don't know what to do, get closer to Abe, Uncle Abe, because he knows what to do. Abraham walks with God, Lot walks with Abraham, and I put in parentheses, at least at first. Okay? This is a good story. And this will preach. Let me tell you, this will preach. All right, there's 3 stories we're going to look at. And if we can do them, I mainly want to get to Sodom, because Sodom is the most important. We're going to take about 10 minutes, I think, for each of these stories. And then we're going to try to draw some conclusions and come back at the end of the question, okay, have we remembered Lot's wife? Have we obeyed the commandment? So the first story is really what we looked at last week, chapter 13. And let me just read a few verses. They come back from Egypt, where Pharaoh and Lot went with them to Egypt. Lot was there when Abraham said to Pharaoh, she's my sister. Pharaoh takes her into his harem and then rewards Abraham and Lot with camels and donkeys and slaves and servants. They become fabulously rich, and then they leave. And part of the problem with being rich is we can't live on the same territory anymore. Our blessings are too great, so we've got to split up. So it just sort of degenerates after Egypt in a lot of ways. But pick up the story at verse 5. And Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, so that the land could not support both of them dwelling together. For their possessions were so great they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. At that time the Canaanites and Perizzites were dwelling in the land. Then Abram said to Lot, his nephew, his potential heir, "Let there be no strife between you and me, between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, I'll go to the right. If you take the right hand, I'll go to the left." And listen to the verbs here, and listen to the wording. Lot lifted up his eyes, same thing that is said of Eve when she looked with her eyes on the forbidden fruit. He lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of what? Egypt. He's just been to Egypt. He fell in love with all things Egyptian. The worldly glitter of Egypt, the pyramids, the culture, the hieroglyphics, the beautiful women, the music. It was a culture, it was maybe the supreme culture on planet Earth at that point. And Lot loved Egypt. He looked at the Jordan Valley, said, that reminds me of Egypt, where my heart is. So Lot, in the direction of Zoar, this was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. There were 5 cities in the Jordan Valley. Sodom and Gomorrah were 2 of them. Today, it's one of the most desolate pieces of real estate on planet Earth. It's the lowest place, 1,200 feet below sea level. But apparently in Abraham and Lot's day, before the destruction, it was like an oasis. It was a very fertile area. Interesting questions there. Lot, verse 11, chose for himself, interesting words there, chose for himself all the Jordan of the valley, and Lot journeyed east. Thus they separated. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley. So the implication of that verse is clearly that the cities of the plain, Sodom and Gomorrah, are not in Canaan. Abraham settled in Canaan. Lot settled somewhere else. So Lot is choosing territory that's not a part of the promise. He's choosing it. Abe is watching. And he moved his tent. What does your translation say? Where did he move his tent? The NIV says near Sodom. My translation says as far as, but I think the idea is he's still living in tents. To follow the call is to be on a journey. Abraham is a pilgrim. He has no lasting city. The tent is a symbol of Abraham, the tent and the altar. Lot is still living in tents, but he's living as close to Sodom as he can get without living in it, because, verse 13, the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. So a pretty interesting description. This is not your garden variety sin. This is not your generic sinful city. The sin in this city is great, and it's wicked, and it's against the Lord. Pretty interesting words, and we know what's coming because we know the rest of the story. And the Lord said to Abram after Lot had separated. So there's this separation. Some quick statements. Okay, this is the first episode in Lot's life. Lot's choice. I can remember in Sunday school growing up, this was a flannel graph, state-of-the-art technology. My mother teaching flannel graph, you know, Abram and Lot chooses the beautiful valley. And the ill-gotten gain in Egypt made both Abraham and Lot wealthy men. The land could not support them both. This resulted in conflict, so they agreed to separate. Abraham, the senior partner, gave the first choice to Lot. And we could speculate, some wonder why he did that. What's going on in Abraham's mind? He knows his nephew well, but he gives him first choice. Let me keep moving. Number two, the text is precise in describing Lot's choice. He lifted up his eyes. Just as Eve's fall began when her eyes became fixed on something forbidden. Go back and read Genesis 3:6, where it says Eve saw that the tree was a delight to the eyes. The Bible is so clear. Sin begins with the eye gate very often. I'm not just looking at something, I'm ogling something. I'm desiring. It's the lust of the eyes. He assumed that his eyes could be trusted. We'll get back to that. Number two, he saw, we're looking at the precision of the vocabulary to describe Lot's choice. So first was he saw. B, he saw that the Jordan Valley was lush and green like Egypt. Lot's experience in Egypt had introduced him to the glitter and glamour of worldly pleasures. And I just want you to put that word worldly down there and the whole idea of worldliness. When was the last time you heard a sermon on worldliness? This is why we need to remember Lot's wife. Because my humble opinion, worldliness is what's destroying the church today. It's not really the doctrinal battles and the gender discussions. There's something, those are symptoms. They're important. The cause is we love this world. James says, don't you know that if you're a friend of the world, you're an enemy of God? And I think 9 out of 10 people on the pews of America would say, I didn't know that. James says, don't you know? And again, we forgot. And when we forget things, like Lot's wife, those sins associated with what we've forgotten come in like a flood. So Lot falls in love with the worldly glitter of Egypt. And that's why he chose Sodom. Letter C. The text says, chose for himself. He didn't pray about it. He didn't say, Uncle Abe, you gave me a hard task. Can you give me a little counsel? What do you think if I chose Sodom and Gomorrah? Think that'd be all right for my wife? My children? Ooh. And they play a huge role in this. Lot's family is what's at stake in this. Maybe that's why Jesus said, remember Mrs. Lot. Mr. Lot was making some pretty significant decisions that had implications for everybody in his home. And his home was messed up, big time. He simply opted for what seemed to be in his best interest. Letter D, he pitched his tents near Sodom. Though enamored with the glitter of Sodom, he seems to know better than to live in that wicked city. I'll just live close to it. But what do you think I am? A pagan? I'm not going to live in it. It doesn't take long. There's an incremental progression in sin. And Lot is the poster child. E, Abraham settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley. We see that Lot's choice was outside the land of promise. This meant he could no longer be considered a possible heir of his uncle. He could not inherit the land promised to Abraham if he was living outside of the land promised to Abraham. Lot's choice is this is a great text to preach on when you preach high school commencement address. This is a... Number 3, Lot's choice was the greatest mistake of his life. Because he never revisited this tragic moment and repented, his life went downhill from here. And we're going to see it. But this is where it starts. Let's pause to analyze Lot's calamitous choice. And this is at least how I outline it. A, it was selfish. He chose for himself. What's in it for me? It's pretty, it's nice, it's got cities, not farmland. It reminds me of Egypt. B, it was based on external appearances. He trusted his eyes. And here's a great quote from John Calvin. Let us then learn from this example that our eyes are not to be trusted. Isn't that a good quote? Letter C, it seemed to be logical to choose the cities of the plain. And D, this came to me late this afternoon, it was Lot's way of coping with the conflict with his uncle. My uncle and his people and my people are in conflict. I think I'll just pack my bags and leave. I've done that 100 times. Isn't that the best way to deal with conflict? I don't know. And that's why you love these Bible stories. They're just so rich and they leave you thinking. Okay, that's the first story, Lot's choice. Second story, are we doing okay? We're good. I'm watching the clock here because I want to get to the good stuff. Is chapter 14. And let me just talk you through this chapter. We're going to pick it up at verse 11. This is one of those chapters that's like, what's that about? 5 kings versus 4 kings. Kings from the east, well, were in dominion over the 5 cities of the plain. They were paying tribute. And after 12 years, they said, we're tired of paying tribute. So the 13th year, the kings of the east come and say, we're going to beat you up and make you pay your taxes again. And that's where they capture and destroy all the cities. And pick it up at verse 11. So the enemy took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their possessions and went their way. They also took Lot, the son of Abram's brother, who was dwelling where? So now he's bought real estate. He moved out of his tent, and he's not in a tent near Sodom. He's in a house in Sodom. He's become a Sodomite. And the word is shocking, but it's the right word. He's a citizen of Sodom. Verse 13. We think of Abram as this sort of pastoral figure sitting on a hillside with sheep, and grandfatherly. Well, let me tell you, he's a military man too. Then one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, first time the word Hebrew occurs in Scripture. We won't pause on that, but it's interesting. Who was living by the oaks of Mamre, the Amorite, the brother of Eshcol and Aner. These were allies of Abram. When Abram heard that his kinsman had been taken captive, he said, "It's not my problem. He made his bed, let him lie in it." That's what I would have said. I think, I watched you make this choice. That's not my business. But he doesn't say a word. He just takes 318 trained men. And these are not just shepherds who picked up their staff and said, we ought to figure out what we can do. These are apparently a commando unit of some kind. And they're going to attack 4 kings and their armies. Pretty significant. Apparently with these 3 brothers, Mamre, Eshcol, and Aner. But they go, and at night they have this sort of like a Gideon. They attack with a small number. Verse 15, he divided his forces by night, he and his servants, and defeated them and pursued them to Hobah near Damascus. Then he brought back all the possessions and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions and Mrs. Lot and I think they had 4 daughters. We're going to talk about it. We know there's 2 that were unmarried, but he also had married daughters. And their sons, they had sons-in-law, plural. So I'm going to assume Mr. and Mrs. Lot had 4 daughters, 2 sons-in-law. They were all captured with the city of Sodom. Uncle Abraham shows up and rescues them. Pretty good story. Now I'm going to skip the next part where the king of Sodom and the king of Salem, named Melchizedek, show up to talk to Abraham about the victory. But I don't know when we're going to get to that, but we may not talk about Melchizedek, but that's interesting. Let me make a few comments here about Lot, because this is what we're studying. Lot has now moved out of his tents near Sodom to living in a house in the city. He has become a Sodomite. Shocking words. When taken captive by an enemy army, Abraham could easily have said, "Not my problem. He made his bed, let him lie in it." Amazingly, Uncle Abe holds no grudges, even though his nephew chose the best land and separated, sort of moved off and cut contact. He quietly forms a militia and in a daring raid defeats the invading army and brings back the hostages. Abe's a pretty amazing guy. I'd like to have him for my uncle. Number 3, looking at this story from Lot's perspective, because where we're going next is to Sodom, and when God destroys Sodom and saves Lot by a hair, barely. So that it's going to get worse. But why is this story here? What was God trying to teach Lot by this incident? Okay? I've got 3 suggestions. I'm going to see if you can give me a few more, but I want you to help me. From Lot's perspective, Lot could have said, "Hey, I've made some bad choices, but God still loves me, and He has a purpose for my life. I need to repent and get back on the journey. But God still loves me. He saved me. I mean, I moved to Sodom. I got taken captive. I got caught up in this international story." He could have said B, "My uncle still loves me and wants to relate to me even though I've treated him poorly and chosen to go my own way. I need to rebuild the relationship." with Uncle Abraham? Yes, you do. You need this uncle in your life. Thirdly, Lot could have said, Sodom is dangerous. This is not what I thought it was going to be. Though prosperous and full of cultural entertainments, it can poison the soul. Maybe this isn't the best place to live and raise my family. Maybe I should move back to Canaan, the land that God promised us. The Canaanites still lived there, but God said, that's where we belong. Any other suggestions? What should Lot have learned? Because we know where this story is going.
We're dangerous when we're living outside of God's will.
We're in a dangerous place when we're not in God's will. Good. What else? I think this was an opportunity for Lot to change course. I mean, but he didn't. So that's why I think this question's important. Yeah. All that glitters is not gold. And Lot fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. And when the fire and brimstone was on the verge of falling, he lingered. And the angels had to pull him out of the city he loved. It's like, Lot? What else? Yes?
We have to watch what's important to us.
We have to watch
What's important to us.
what's important. Where are our priorities? Yeah, okay. What do you think Mrs. Lot and the 4 daughters are experiencing as they watch their husband and father make his choices, move his tent, sell his tent, buy real estate, then get captured, then get rescued? I mean, this has to have a, remember Lot's wife. What's she experiencing in this?
Maybe she wasn't encouraging to go back to Sodom. Maybe she's the reason.
Some of the, where did she come from? To me, it's not clear. Some of the commentaries say she is a sodomite, that he married a citizen, but it doesn't, and I can't find it in the text where it says that. I don't know who she is. She had issues, but again, her husband had issues. It's a good point. Okay, well, keep working on that. I love these Bible stories. They're good. Let's go to chapter 19. And I think we've timed it well. We do go to 9:15, 8:15. We need to change our clock in here. We'll come back in the next few weeks and talk about chapters 15, 16, and 17. Really good stuff. But sandwiched between the covenant, which is chapter 15, chapter 16 is the birth of Ishmael and Hagar. Chapter 17 is circumcision. All the big stuff in Abraham's life is coming, but sandwiched between it are the stories of Lot. At the end of chapter 18 is when the three look at 18 verse 1. I don't want to get stuck in chapter 18. So let me read you verse 1. The Lord appeared to Abram by the oaks of Mamre as he sat by the door of his tent, and he lifted up his eyes, and behold, 3 men. Oh my goodness, that is... So who is it? Who is they? Who are... There's 3, and yet the text says the Lord appeared. just so and it gets more mysterious as these visitors talk to Abram and Sarah. And what are they there to do? Well, they're there to tell Abram she's going to have a baby. Sarah laughs, and they said, "Why did Sarah laugh?" And Sarah says, "I didn't laugh." And the visitors say, "Did too." You know, that's good story. Then these three or two, by the time they get to Sodom, there's just two. But the three start walking from Abram's tent toward Sodom, down the hill toward the cities of the plain. And God says, "Should I hide from Abram what I'm about to do?" The outcry of Sodom has reached heaven, and I've come down to verify the facts. If it's as bad as I've heard it is. And Abram stands in front of him, God, and says, "What if there's 50 righteous people?" And then Abraham's counting, what if there's 45? What if there's 35? And you know, all the way down to 10. So Abraham is interceding, and to me it's obvious he's not really burdened for the city of Sodom. Uncle Abraham is burdened for Lot. We're going to come back to this chapter. So you've got the intercession of Abraham, which is the backdrop for what we're about to read. We're at now chapter 19. We're going to come back to 18, so don't despair. Let me read a little. I'm in chapter 19. The two angels. So now the three are two, and the word is messengers, but it's pretty clear these visitors are from heaven, and they're foreigners looking for hospitality in a city. Beware when foreigners show up among you that it may not be the Lord himself in disguise. This is what Mother Teresa was all about. That God's distressing disguises. He's come to Calcutta and he looks like a leper. And I think everybody said, "That's the craziest thing I've ever seen." Yeah, it really is. Some by entertaining angels unawares. Be careful. We're going to look at these verses. Okay. Two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was doing what? What does it mean in Old Testament times to sit in the gate? It means to be a leader. Typically, it's possible there was just a bench there by the gate and he was just sort of hanging out. But I don't think that's the point. This is where the elders and the civic leaders did business. When Lot was sitting in the gate, now think about this. He looked at Sodom. He moved close to Sodom. He moved into Sodom. Now he's become the mayor. It doesn't say mayor, and I don't think he was the mayor, but I think he was a civic leader. He's in the gate. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face to the earth and said, "My lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you can rise early and go on your way." The issue of hospitality in this story is huge. I'm not talking about Martha Stewart kind of hospitality. I'm talking about Middle Eastern hospitality. They said, "No, we will spend the night in the town square." And Lot said, "Don't do that." Sodom is not a safe place. Let's pick it up at verse 4. So Lot brings them to his house, and he made a feast for them, that's verse 3, of unleavened bread. Interesting. Abraham had made a feast for them. He had killed a lamb, and he and his wife, Sarah, put on the dog. Lot, Mrs. Lot, she's not on kitchen duty that day. It's really, she doesn't lift her finger to help entertain these guys. Lot does it all, and all he offers them is basically unleavened bread. I'll save that one. Verse 4, before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, young and old, all the people, to the last man, surrounded the house. Listen to the wording on that. The men of the city, the men of Sodom, young and old, all the people, to the last man. So apparently every male in Sodom, that would include Lot's sons-in-laws, are surrounding the house. Why? They called to Lot, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out that we may know them. And that's have sexual relations with them. There's a lot of interesting discussion on these words. I'm trying to avoid, I want to stay on my big picture. Lot went out to the men at the entrance, shut the door. Doors are important in Genesis. The ark had a door. The Garden of Eden had a gate, but doors. Shut the door after him and said, I beg you, my brothers. So Lot is calling his fellow Sodomites his brothers. That could be civic politeness, but I think he's saying, no, I'm one of you. Do not act so wickedly. Behold, I have 2 daughters who have not known any man. They're virgins. That's interesting in a place like Sodom to have 2 girls that are still virgins. Maybe Lot was trying to raise them well.
I just have to say this.
Lot is in a dilemma. He has 2 angels that he's offering hospitality to. He's responsible for their well-being. They're in trouble. They're about to be sodomized, raped. Lot went out to the men, I have 2 daughters. Let me bring them out and do to them as you please. I think the word is as seems you good. Anybody have the King James there on verse 8?
New King James, it says, do to them as you wish.
Okay, maybe I'm thinking of another verse, but I'll come back. It's okay. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof. But they said, stand back. And they said, and now the men of Sodom are angry at a fellow Sodomite. Initially, they're angry at the visitor, the foreigner, but now they're angry at their neighbor, who's also a foreigner. Lot is not, he's a different tribe. This fellow came to sojourn, and he's become a judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. Then they pressed hard against the man Lot, drew him near to break the door down. And the men, the angels, reached out their hands, brought Lot into the house with them, and shut the door. And they struck with blindness the men who were at the entrance of the house, small and great, so that they wore themselves out, groping for the door. Then the men said to Lot, the angels, have you anyone else here, sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in the city? Bring them out of the place. For now they're going to tell their mission. They haven't yet told Lot why they've come to town. Here they do. We are about to destroy this place because the outcry against its people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law, so apparently he has married daughters. We know he's got 2 unmarried daughters who were to marry his daughters. I'm looking at, okay. Let me keep going. Up, get out of the place. The Lord is about to destroy the city. But he seemed to his sons-in-law, what does your Bible say? Yeah, we're not going to take this seriously. You're joking. We don't really respect you, future father-in-law or present father-in-law. Your life doesn't back up this message that we should leave the town. When you don't live a life of integrity, then when the chips are down and you try to say it, chances are good your family's going to roll their eyes and say, why should we even believe you? Verse 15, as the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, up, take your wife, your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city. But he lingered. That's a great text right there. Lot lingered. So the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. As they brought them out, they said, escape for your life. Don't look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape where? To the hills, not to another city, lest you be swept away. And Lot says, can we talk about this? And he's going to negotiate with them. No, my lords, behold your servant, if your servant has found favor in your sight, you have shown me great kindness in saving my life, but I cannot escape to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Behold, this city is near enough to flee to, and it's a little one. Let me escape there. Isn't it a little one? And my life will be saved. He said to him, behold, I grant you this favor, that I will not overthrow the city of which you've spoken. Escape there quickly, for I can do nothing till you arrive there. The name of that city was Zoar. So as they're leaving to go to the hills for safety, Lot says, can't I go to another city? And the angel says, okay. Last story. I'm not going to read it. Oh, well, let me read this part. The sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. He overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. And Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Abraham went early in the morning to look to the place where he had stood before the Lord, and he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley, and he looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham, his prayer, and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which they had lived. The last paragraph, Lot and his 2 daughters leave the city that they thought they were going to like, and they move to a cave. In the cave, the daughter says, we're not going to ever get married. Let's get daddy drunk and sleep with daddy. And they did it once with the oldest daughter, and then the second daughter. He did it twice. And they gave birth to the Moabites and the Ammonites, future enemies of Israel for centuries. Skip down to Roman numeral 3. Let's do that. Let me most of what I'm skipping we talked about, but it's in the last 5 minutes, let's do this. What are the characteristics of a worldly Christian? And let me just tell you what I think we've learned from Lot and his wife. A, second-hand faith. As long as Lot walked with Abraham, who walked with God, his life seemed to be okay. But once he separated from Abraham, when the teenager leaves home and they're off on their own and they don't have the structure and the influence, then you know what's in the heart, what's always been in the heart. Second characteristic, a worldly Christian trusts his eyes. And that's really another way, if I desire it, it must be good. Why would I desire it if it weren't good? So I'm going to fulfill my desires. The Bible has a word for people who do what their hearts tell them to do. Anybody know what the word is? Fool. Fool. The fool says, there's a way that seems right to me. I'm going to take it. And when we tell our sweet little children in school, just get in touch with what your heart tells you you want to be and just be what your heart wants to be, what are we telling them? What are we telling them? C, foolishly, a worldly Christian assumes he can resist the corrosive influence of sin. He sees Sodom, he moves near Sodom, he buys a home and moves into Sodom. He becomes a respected leader in Sodom and considers the Sodomites his brothers, even though he doesn't practice their perversities, Lot. He is all mixed up in it. Unconfessed sin always puts us on a slippery slope. Lot's story just gets worse and worse and worse. D, double-mindedness. Though Lot apparently loves the Lord and wants, most of the time, to do the right thing, he also loves Sodom and its glitter and glamour. He wavers between the city of God and the city of man. A double-minded man is unstable. E, hypocrisy. Though he says the right things and professes the right beliefs, his actions give a different message. Lot's family saw him for the hypocrite that he was. Thus, when he told them to flee, they didn't take him seriously. They thought he was joking. And F, Lot was saved, but as through fire. That comes from 1 Corinthians 3. We are surprised to learn that the New Testament, or at least I'm surprised to learn that the New Testament calls Lot a righteous man. It's like, really? In comparison to the Sodomites, Oswald Chambers, that's what he says. Well, if you compare him to the Sodomites, you know, he's a morally impressive man. Okay, I'll grant that, but he gave his daughters away, for heaven's sake. That's, but we should not glibly conclude saying, well, at least he was saved. At least he made it to heaven. Oh my goodness, that's the kind of talk I hear in church all the time. You know, well, at least I'll go to heaven when they die. Assuming he did make it to heaven. Consider the cost of his worldliness. And here's just two. He had, as far as I can tell, no positive influence on Sodom. Though he lived there for years and maybe was the mayor, was a respected citizen, the Lord couldn't find even 10 people who were righteous. And far more troubling, he had no positive influence on his family. His wife turned into a pillar of salt. His married daughters and their families were clearly stayed back in Sodom, and his unmarried daughters were a moral disaster. They got daddy drunk and slept with him. All right, conclusion. You guys have been great. Remember Lot's wife. Let's remember 3 things. There are 3 things I think Jesus would say he wants us to remember about Mrs. Lot. So here's my sermon. All else was introduction. Here's the sermon. Remember her opportunities. As a member of Abraham's family, she had the greatest privilege in history up until that time of knowing the truth about God. I mean, if you could be any place on planet Earth at that moment in history to know the truth about God, get as close to Abraham as you could get. And she was. What an opportunity. To them much is given, much will be required. This explains why it will be more tolerable on the day of judgment for Sodom than for Capernaum. Remember when Jesus said, "Woe be unto you, Capernaum." Because if the miracles done in you that I've been doing had been done in Sodom, Sodom would have repented long ago. When you stand at the judgment, you got a lot to account for. Mrs. Lot. B, remember Lot's wife. B, remember her sin. She didn't commit murder. She didn't commit adultery. I don't think she was a sexual pervert like others in Sodom may have been. What'd she do? It wasn't some great moral perversity that brought God's judgment. It was her love for this world. She looked back. She couldn't let go of the things of this world. Don't you know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? And C, remember her judgment. She was turned into a pillar of salt. It was terrifying, painful, permanent. Several of the commentators I read said it may have been something like happened at Pompeii, you know, when all the volcanic ash, and it just froze the bodies. Or froze is not the right word. Galvanized, turned them to stone, petrified them. And in the Dead Sea area, there's numerous pillars that are claimed to be, that's Lot's wife. But the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. We need something happy right about now, I think. But remember Lot's wife.
Remember that Ruth was a Moabite.
There you go.
In the line of Jesus.
Is everybody hearing? We could remember that Ruth, Boaz and Ruth was a Moabite. Well said. God can redeem. Yes. Very good. That's very good. Jesus, thank you tonight for this commandment to remember Mrs. Lot. And we want to do that. And we want to do it in a way that makes a difference. Lord, I want to pray especially for our own families, our own children, our grandchildren, our siblings, our spouses. Lord, what you're doing in our lives has implications for others, and it makes us tremble. Have mercy on us. Help us to walk not just close to people who walk with you, but help us to walk with you. Continue to teach us even as we sleep. Keep us safe as we travel. Bring us together again. In Jesus' name and for the sake of the kingdom. Amen.